Enjoy the show.
Beaming at you from the depths of the internet.
This is the Temple of Geek Podcast, your one stop for all things geek.
Welcome to the Temple of Geek Podcast. My name is Kari, and I will be your host as we share our thoughts on Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. If you haven't watched the film, save this episode for later and come back because there are going to be spoilers. If this is your first time tuning into the Temple of Geek Podcast, welcome. The Temple of Geek Podcast has been around since 2012 and is hosted by various geeks from the Temple of Geek team. Here we cover all manner of geek and pop culture news and events. To our returning listeners, thank you again for tuning in. We really appreciate you being here. And without further ado, with me today is Natacia. Natacia, welcome to the podcast. Can you briefly introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm happy to. First of all, it's excited to be here. I know Kari from just all of our social media interactions. I have my own pop culture podcast called Pop Chatter, where I talk about similar geek related culture things. And yeah, I saw this movie. I'm excited to talk about it. And I generally love talking about like MCU things, Star Wars stuff. That's kind of my bread and butter, but just any kind of geek culture stuff is my thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Natacia, with us today.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. What were your initial thoughts of the film?
I had such a good time, honestly. Like I thought it was so fun. I thought it was so funny. I mean, of course, again, like you said, we're gonna get into it in a few minutes. But what I can say is, as somebody who's been reading comic books
Mhm.
since the '90s, this is just one of those projects that just like really felt like I was like watching a comic book. And I would say the most like that in the MCU that I've seen outside of, I don't know, I think maybe the most like it.
Mhm.
So yeah, I just thought it was really fun. I had a great time. It was visually really stunning, I felt,
Mhm.
and I just thought it had a really good balance of comedy as well. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, great. But I generally feel the same way. To me, it was a very fun and entertaining movie. That's what it was. You know, it wasn't like my favorite. It wasn't like, oh my God, this is like masterpiece and stuff. But
Yeah.
it was supposed to be silly, and it did what it came and did that. Even some of the corny jokes and stuff, they hit for me, because it was just supposed to be silly like that. And I'm not a comic book reader, so I don't know the history of a lot of these new characters and everything. But I've heard from like yourself, like you said, that a lot of the comic readers, they're like, this is one of the most comic type of movie that has come out
Yeah.
from the MCU. Like, it's very comic book.
100%.
Yeah. So I watched it too. Like, the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, I don't know how to feel about this movie. I was like, there was a lot going on. But then I saw it a second time and I was like, listen, it's Ant-Man. It's not supposed to take itself too seriously, So
100%.
yeah, so that was pretty cool. So overall, what did you think about the story arc of the movie?
Yeah, so I guess here's where I get into where I feel like there's just been like a lot of controversy in the conversation about this movie. I'm going to be very real here and say the story is not the strongest, and that's okay. Like it didn't take away from the experience. I thought that there were definitely some kind of like weird plot holes with the character of Janet in particular,
Mm-hmm.
specifically because it's really clear that she has such an interest at the end of the previous Ant-Man movie
Mm-hmm.
about continuing to sort of like explore the
Yeah, yeah,
quantum realm
yeah.
again after coming back. And then there's a shift in this movie where she is just like, no, I don't even want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, what happened?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
so I mean, I think like from that aspect, I can understand critiques like that. And to be honest, I just think it's like just a genuine like plot hole.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, I thought it was like I loved the relationship between Scott and his daughter. I thought that there was just like a lot of people talking about like, the recasting of Cassie.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that they had such good chemistry, but specifically from a story perspective. I really loved how she clearly just like is so proud of her father and
Mm-hmm.
like she's really taking after him and
Yeah.
is also like frustrated that he's not doing more. I guess like the only other thing I would say is I think I'm really excited to see where they go from here with Kang.
Mm-hmm.
I think his story was actually pretty straightforward, to be honest, and
Mm-hmm.
I actually really liked that this was honestly one of the most uncomplicated MCU
Yeah,
plot
yeah.
points. He was just like, I got trapped here. I don't want to be here anymore.
Yes, 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 yes.
So I'm gonna trick people into like getting me out of here. And I kind of liked that, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I kind of agree. The movie was just straight to the point. There was like no, deeper connection, deeper,
Nope.
you know, do we have to think about what the plot is? No, it's just straight to the point. The movie came and did what it was supposed to do: get us into the quantum realm, introduce us to Kang, and
Yep.
set up that plot point, for whatever's going to come next. And I appreciated that, like you said, it was just simple. We didn't, and I know a lot of, I've over told this, of course, this movie has been very controversial with everybody's discourse and stuff. Like, I've also heard people saying that, the stakes weren't as high, that maybe if somebody would have been killed, like Hank or Janet or something. But we didn't really have that in the previous to Ant-Man's movies either. We didn't have anybody like
Yeah.
dying or being super emotional, like a super emotional movie or anything like that. And I think, this Ant-Man Quantumania is just following that same pattern from the other two movies. It's not supposed to be a deep emotional, sad,
Yep.
tragic movie. It was just a
Yeah.
fun Ant-Man movie that provided for us the introduction of Kang and what's going to be coming next. So I appreciated the movie for that.
Yeah, I really agree. And like one of the things I have been thinking a lot about is, this is the start of the new phase,
Hmm.
right? So we're getting into sort of setting the stage for what's to come
Hmm.
in this new era. And four phase 4 was so focused on grief and everybody moving through their grief that like honestly it was really nice to be able
Hmm.
to just go into a movie and be like, hey, we're having fun again. you know
Yes, yes.
like and I think like that's probably why this tonal shift has been difficult for people,
Hmm.
because everything that we have been introduced to throughout phase 4, especially how it ended with
Yeah.
Wakanda Forever, is so focused on how people are dealing and moving through their grief post blip and all the things that have happened like
Hmm.
after and during that time.
Yes.
And this movie was just kind of getting us back to basics. Like,
Hmm.
it made me hopeful that we can go into a phase where there's just going to be a lot more of an adventurous tone.
Hmm.
I hope we pick that back up with like the Marvels and all the other projects that are coming out.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. I think that that's probably influencing people a little bit right
Yeah,
now
because
too.
we're used to a certain tone from Marvel, even though
Mhm.
Marvel is not as dark as DC. But there
Right.
was always that tone of a little bit more seriousness,
Um,
even with having, the funny bits and stuff in every other movie. Even in Love and Thunder, even though Love and Thunder was also such a fun movie, it was still very emotional, having
yeah.
lost Jane and everything, right? It definitely is gonna take for some people getting used to this new tone, and we're just gonna have
Mhm.
to see, what the rest of the shows and the movies are gonna bring then. Definitely. So, and for the next question, what did you think of Kang's motivation?
Again, I love that it was just so straightforward. He was like, "Okay, I got stuck here and I'm trying to get out." I think I really loved the interactions that he had with Janet,
Hmm.
and I've been joking about this ever since I saw this movie,
Yeah.
that, like, it was basically the Kang and Janet movie.
Uh-huh.
It should have been called Kang and Janet Quantumania, 'cause this was really a movie about them entirely.
Yeah.
And yeah, I thought that he did a really good job. I mean, Jonathan Majors is incredible.
Yes.
And he managed to, in a movie that is so, like we've talked about, just like very leaning into like heavy comedy, he managed to still bring such a menacing presence to the story to his character to how he interacted with the people around him,
Mhm.
where even though you didn't really see him do anything that wild, and the circumstances in which he was taken out were a bit on the silly side, if
Yes.
we're just gonna be honest. Um, I still think that he managed to bring such a great presence, and in terms of, yeah, the arc that he had in his story and his motivations, yeah, I like that they kept it pretty simple, because I think it's gonna get a lot more complex as we bring in more of the versions of him
Yeah,
into the story,
I think
and I think we're gonna learn a little bit more about this version of Kang in future movies too,
Mhm.
because, like, I think we just kinda saw him really the little, like, middle part and the end of his life. We didn't really see anything that, like, led up
Yeah,
to what inspired people, like his other versions of him, to trap him here,
yeah.
right? And I think that what I appreciated was he definitely, like, in a very again, in a very, like, comic book sort of way, was just like, I don't wanna say two-dimensional. I don't wanna go that far, but, like, he was just like, "Hey, I conquer planets, and that's just sort of what I do. I conquer civilizations, and that's just my thing." I think that we have to remember that a lot of these comic book characters that we're introduced to in the comic book stories,
Mhm.
they don't always, a lot of times when we learn about their backstories, it's over, like, a longer span of time.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know, I'm okay with it being kinda simple.
Mhm.
I appreciate how this movie had a really interesting theme around colonialism almost.
Mhm.
Like, it didn't really take it too far like we see in, like other things
Yeah,
like, Black Panther
Black
and things
Panther,
like
yeah.
that. But, like, I think I was really interested in getting to see, like, what happens to the civilization that he actually conquers.
Mhm.
We got to see, like, little snippets of that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
No, I agree. It
Yeah.
was again, this movie is just basically establishing a base point, a baseline of,
Yep.
what's gonna happen, who is the new big bad now, and how,
Yep.
because we obviously we got that in the end of season, the first season of Loki. We got an
Yep.
introduction, but now we're getting a little bit even more explanation. And like you said, I like that we kept it simple because it definitely looks like it's gonna get way more complicated. Now with
Yep.
we saw in the end credit how we're gonna have all these different variants of Kang and stuff.
Mhm.
And it's not just Kang that's gonna be a menace, it's every all of him, all of the other
Yep.
different ones are just gonna be an insanity. And then it's gonna get way more confusing with, again, explaining about the whole timelines thing. I'm still kind of confused about it. I'm not gonna lie, because it's like, how does this work if it's just this one, and then how did the other time? Yeah, it's a whole mess. But that's why they're taking their time and explain and telling us all these stories
Yep.
little by little, because I think it's gonna be even bigger than what Endgame was, or Thanos was, because Thanos was just straightforward. I just want to get rid of half of the population of the whole universe. That's it. Get these
Yep.
stones, we got it, blah blah blah. But now we're gonna have all these different, and then it's gonna be so much science involved as well. Because Kang is
Yeah.
not like Kang is, like has supernatural powers. He's just a really smart scientist,
Yep.
and he's able to develop all
Mhm.
this crazy tech. So
Mhm.
it's gonna be interesting, with that change there with him.
I very much agree with that, and one of my biggest complaints about the MCU that I've had in the past is
Mhm.
how when we get a villain, they just sort of kill them off, and then, like, that's it.
Mhm.
Like, you do you do get to see, like, Thanos kind of developing his, like, plan or whatever, like, over the course of, like, the years,
Mhm.
but, like, how much does he really interact with people,
Yeah.
honestly, until he, like, comes to, like, his plan? And I appreciate that we have all these Kang variants that are going to be throughout the story, like, in, like, really big ways. And I'm imagining it's gonna be, like, a really big part of, like, the Loki show,
Yes.
especially given, like, the post-credit scene that we saw
Mhm.
and everything. I'm really excited to actually get to like explore a
Mhm.
villain over a long period of time because
Yeah.
like I feel like the MCU does not do that often
Yeah.
actually.
I was just thinking that how maybe people might say, well, where was Kang all this time during the whole, first three phases and stuff? We remember during the first three phases, He Who Remains had just that one timeline going on right now.
Yeah.
So there were
Yep.
no other Kangs at all, like no other
Mhm.
variants at this time. Now we're gonna see them in that timeline. We're gonna see all the different timelines, and now we're gonna see all of them finally. But it was because of He Who Remains. We just had that one loop going on. That was just one timeline with all that craziness. Now we're gonna get that with like an infinite amount of timelines.
Yeah,
It's
we're
gonna
really
be
gonna see the
crazy.
implications.
Hmm.
Yeah, we're really gonna see the implications of what happened in the Loki finale, like, really impact everything else that
Everything.
happens in the story going
Hmm.
forward. So, I'm really
Absolutely.
excited to see
Yeah,
that.
yeah, me too, definitely. So, what did you think about the decisions made by different characters in the film?
Oh my god, so much to say. First of all, I just had such an appreciation for Michael Douglas just, like, being in the background,
He had me
only
dying. He
popping up.
was, yeah, he had me dying.
I was laughing at every single line that that he had. I was obsessed with Michael Douglas in
Yes,
this
yes,
movie.
yes.
First of all, let's just start with Scott.
Hmm.
I appreciate that Scott is like, "Listen, I did a whole lot previously, and I just wanna write my book and live in peace and get, like, a free coffee every once in a while," you know? I'm like, "That would be me." Like, it was so relatable,
Hmm.
and I was just feeling so frustrated with everybody, like, wanting Scott to do so much more, and I was like, This man literally saved the universe. He should be able to get to rest for the
Yes,
rest of his life if
yes,
he
yes.
wants to." Like, it was just so funny to, like, watch people get, like, on top of him about that. But, yeah, no, I think, like, the motivations were interesting. I feel like, again, I really enjoyed Cassie and Scott's relationship.
Hmm.
There's a part of me that wished I mean, this movie was doing so
Yes,
much.
it really.
Like, we didn't really get to see, like, Scott with any of his friends.
Hmm.
We didn't really get to see like, the lack of Luis in this
Yeah,
movie was
it
heartbreaking,
really was.
heartbreaking.
Yes.
Like, I just kept I was so convinced I was gonna see him at some point.
Yeah, no, me too.
It
I
was
thought they were gonna bring their at least some of the crew. Yeah.
Yeah, something. So we never really got to see him do that, and then we never really got to see Cassie with her mom or her stepdad. So, like, I felt like there was something I was missing. And I couldn't quite understand where Cassie's frustration with Scott was coming from. So, like, I feel like they missed a step somewhere in, like, explaining a little bit of that, and I feel like some of that could have happened through conversations with these, like, other characters
Hmm.
who've been in, like,
Yeah,
previous,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
movies, especially Cassie's mother, because she wasn't blipped as far as I know,
yeah.
so, like, she was with Cassie during all of that time
Hmm.
that Scott was gone, so I feel like there was just, like, context that should have been
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think the motivations again were straightforward. Like Scott was just like, I just kind of want to rest. I'm only taking myself into this quantum realm to save my daughter,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
pretty much it. I will say I was not one of the people that ever thought that Scott was gonna die because
Mhm.
I was just like, that's just like not what the Ant-Man movies
Yeah,
do. Like
yeah, yeah.
that's just like not. But I was genuinely so not surprised, but when the Wasp goes back in
Mhm.
to, like, save him from Kang, I just felt like no emotional connection between these two characters at
Mhm.
all in this
Mhm.
movie.
Yeah.
So for that big dramatic ending, I think it was supposed to be a big dramatic ending.
Mhm.
I mean, I wish they would have done more to like
Yeah.
get us to care
Yes,
about these two
yes.
as a couple.
Yes, yes, yes. No, I completely
Yeah.
agree. I think the same thing for me was that I missed having them establish more the relationships between the
Yeah.
characters, right?
Yeah.
And that definitely was missed in this movie because, like you said, if we didn't know why Cassie was acting the way she was, or how Janet and Hank and Cassie got so close to each other. Now she's calling him grandpa, you know?
Yeah.
And most definitely freaking Scott and Hope.
Hope. Yeah.
There was like, I did not feel like the love, like with a romantic connection between them two. So it was just
At
like,
all.
they felt just like, they're cute, kind of. Okay, we're cool, we're kind of friends, but we kiss and stuff. Like, I don't know. There wasn't that romanticism there. With the other movies, we've had the couples actually, show that type of relationship
Yeah.
between them. Like you said, if we would have felt it more between them throughout the movie, like that love or romanticism, that made that ending would have been like way more impactful, just like you said, and stuff. But we didn't get that. I mean, the movie was so straightforward that it missed out on, having us
Yeah.
connect to the characters.
Yeah. Yeah, the character development wasn't there, so, like,
Mm-hmm.
when I was talking earlier about, like, some writing decisions,
Mm-hmm.
like, that's kind of the biggest
Yeah,
thing,
yeah, I
and
agree.
again, that's why I say, like, Kang it was like the Kang and Janet show, like, I
I
felt
felt that
like
them two,
that
I felt
their
that.
chemistry was
Absolutely. That chemistry right there was like, oh, I mean, I get it, Janet. I get it. Of course. Me too.
I know. I've been for 30 years of wouldn't have even needed all
I
that
know,
time.
exactly. But again, straightforward stuff. Janet letting us know, obviously she didn't want to delve into the quantum realm. We figure out they let us know why Cassie's doing what she wanted to do with, trying to get a signal out to the quantum realm because she didn't want what happened with Scott to maybe happen again, that they couldn't,
Yeah.
clear cut motivations definitely were there,
Yeah. Yeah. And last thing I will say though is like there really should have been a better explanation for why nobody told Janet that they were doing all of this experimentation.
Yeah,
Like,
because what
because
did they say? They just said that, because she wasn't being too open about it, so they didn't want to like upset her. Is that what it was? I think I don't. I
yeah.
think
I was like, that's not a good enough reason. Like, for a fact that it's at least dangerous enough that this woman was trapped there.
Mhm.
Scott got trapped in there too.
Yeah,
Like, and the fact that they left the two people out who were the
were
ones who
there?
actually
Yes,
got trapped
yes. Like the
was
experts, like at least
wild.
yeah. That was a little bit of like what's going on. What I did hear somebody say that the difference between how Janet was in the other movie, like she was okay with doing it and stuff. That I think it was because the quantum realm where they ended up being was so much more deeper into the
Yep.
quantum than what they were doing in the other movie, that they were just like, it wasn't that far in deep,
Right.
so she wasn't concerned about that because they weren't going past to where she was at.
Right.
They couldn't get to that place anymore.
Yeah.
Which is okay, I get it, because Scott was able to go in and come out, go in and come out with no problem because they weren't going so
Yeah.
deep into the quantum realm.
Yeah, and I think like the fact that she was also involved in making sure
That it
that like they
wouldn't
never
get
got
past
too
that.
deep,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Like I think that that was also part of it, which is
Hmm.
again another reason why it is so wild that I could understand Cassie is a child
Hmm.
still, like young at least,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
But for Hope and Hank to be that irresponsible was like didn't make sense to me,
Yeah.
honestly.
But I
But
guess
yeah, I don't
also, but
know.
I think also because Janet didn't tell them the whole truth, they wouldn't have known that there was something that was even more deeper into the quantum realm. They thought it was just that little piece where Scott
For
was at.
sure.
Talking about where Scott got stuck, because people are like, oh, if it was 30 years in the quantum realm, how much was it here on Earth? I think I read that supposedly the quantum realm is at the same pace as us. It's just that where Scott got stuck, it was just like a pocket where
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
works differently. So it's not the same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, that's the impression that I got. That's what
Yeah.
if people have been saying too, and that
Hmm.
makes a lot of sense to me because then you start like asking questions like, well, why did she age and
Hmm.
Scott like
Hmm.
didn't
Yeah,
age
yeah,
and stuff
exactly.
like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that totally makes sense to me.
Also, we know that's possible because of what happened to the ants. I mean, the ants
Yep.
lived 1,000 years in what, in 1 hour or something in that pocket.
Mhm.
So there are pockets,
Mhm.
crazy time pockets in the quantum
Mhm.
realm. So it's like a whole craziness for sure. Definitely.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this was a very heavy CGI movie. What did you
It
think
was.
about it visually? What do you think about the visuals in this movie?
You know, again, I know like a lot again, it's controversial. I think a lot of people were really annoyed by it or whatever.
Hmm.
I don't know. It just didn't bother me. It's I guess like to me, it didn't look as real as like a lot of the other CGI we've seen in like other Marvel
Hmm.
projects.
Yeah.
But one, I'm just gonna say this, like the Marvel does tend to be knocking out these projects like real close to each other.
Hmm.
The CJ could have been stronger,
Hmm.
and it is part of like why I'm excited that they are pushing back some projects like the Marvels,
Marvels.
for instance,
Hmm.
because like, I'm like give your artists like more time, you
Hmm.
know, to like invest in creating like better, richer CGI that
Hmm.
like looks better. But in the context of what we are looking at in this story in particular, I don't know, it was such a completely fantastical world
Hmm.
that I kind of am okay with it looking like so completely otherworldly, and
Yeah.
that's sort of like how the CGI resonated for me.
Yeah.
And in some ways, like kind of compared to a project like the Multiverse of Madness, which this is not me being critical of that movie, but
Hmm.
I will say that when I went into the Multiverse of Madness, I was expecting like a lot of like weird bizarre
Hmm.
multiversal versions and stuff like that. And we didn't really get anything that kooky. We kind
Hmm.
of got like, you know, like little tiny snippets of things, but
Yeah.
for the most part, we just got like Earth and
Hmm.
just like a kind of slightly different version of it.
Yeah.
And I kind of liked that we got introduced to something so completely weird.
Hmm.
And I feel like the visuals like matched the
Yeah.
oddity of what we were
Yeah.
saying.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, and I said it when I first came in, I was like, listen, if you're very picky about CGI, you're gonna be, let down.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
picky about I'm not like, oh my God, this just the CGI was so bad it took me out of the experience.
Me
It
either.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. And like anything having to do with the fault of the visuals or anything is just because I wear glasses and there was so much going on at the same time. It was just a lot that I
Yep.
sometimes it kind of got blurred to me. So it was just kind of I would get dizzy at certain. I was almost getting dizzy at certain points. But of course, that's
Yeah.
just how the movie goes. It's very crazy. The camera action was like also kind of
Yep.
crazy at certain points. But visually, yeah, a lot of the CGI was like, oh my gosh. But like you said, because of where we were at in the quantum realm, I would figure that everything is so kooky and so weird and so. I mean, look at the type of characters that we had in there. The type of quantum realm characters that we had in there, and I love that. It was so different and. Multiverse of Madness is supposed to be all these different universes and all of them are just like weird and what the heck is going on and why they look like this, and we got this with Quantumania, which is,
Yep.
I think, hopefully it's gonna be like a foreshadowing of what we're gonna get with all these other different timelines. I didn't have a problem visually. It was just awesome because it was just so much colors and so many very colorful. It was a lot, again, a lot going on, but I didn't mind it at all. at all, at all.
Yeah, the whole time I was like, "Oh my god, my niece and nephews are going to have a ball with
Yes,
this.
yes.
They're going
Like
to
I took
love
my
they're gonna
kids
love."
and they were like
Yeah.
invested in like, oh my God, what is that? And why does he look like that? And oh my God, he's so weird. But they were laughing. When Modoc came on, forget about it. I know people are like, oh my God, how that's so bad. It was hard. Modoc was so bad, it was so good.
I loved it.
I
I
I
was
was dying
scratching
laughing with Modoc. I was like, what is this ridiculousness? I love it. So ridiculous is amazing. Oh my God.
Yeah, and it's like all of the critiques I've just seen people give about MODOK is so interesting to me because I'm like, he is ridiculous in the comics. He's
That's what
literally
I
a
heard.
giant head
Yes.
with baby limbs. Like that is literally MODOK. Like I don't know how they could have actually done it any better. This is
Yeah.
what he looks like.
That's what I've heard from all the comic readers. They're like, listen, this is exactly how it's supposed to go. It's how it's supposed to be. We're not supposed to take him serious. He is a serious character that could like kill you with no problem, but
Yeah,
he's also ridiculous at the same time. I was like, okay, so if that's what it is, they definitely got that pat down because I was
they
dying the whole
achieved
time.
it.
Yes, I was dying. Oh my gosh, it was awesome. And then I love the ants too. Like I love the explanation of the ants, you know?
Yeah.
That was really cool. And then cuz I've seen people, "Oh my god, Ken got lured by ants." You know, if ants
Yeah.
existed at that size in the real world, we would all be so much screwed.
We would be dead, actually. That's what we
They
wouldn't be
are
here.
the strongest, for their size, they are the strongest, I believe,
Yep.
that they are.
Yep. 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 Yep.
And
Yep.
imagine in 1,000 years they got so smart, technologically advanced, and maybe even their tech was even more advanced than Kang's at that point. You
I
know?
just yeah, I felt that the explanation for the ants absolutely made sense. Like again, I said this earlier, of course, watching Kang get beaten up by a bunch of ants was silly.
It
Yes.
was, yes, absolutely, it was. But for some reason, it makes sense to me because of what the ants,
Well,
the
the
explanation that they gave us.
setting.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, it just makes it yeah, exactly. To me, I'm like, this is just like the kind of story that we are telling for this. And like,
Hmm.
we're gonna get other movies that are gonna take stuff a lot more serious. We're gonna get other stories that are gonna be silly as
Hmm.
well. Like,
Hmm.
I just think that there are aspects of the story that just make a lot of visual sense and make sense in terms of yeah, like the ants
Hmm.
and things like that because like I mean yeah, we're just in a very like weird, different, fantastical world that we just haven't seen yet in the
Hmm.
MCU.
Hmm.
And I think like we are going to get like darker stuff with Kang later on, and it will not be quite as easy to defeat him in
Hmm.
future projects. But in this one, he got taken out by ants.
But
I don't know what to tell you guys.
not only that, he wasn't in his. That wasn't. He was still stuck in the quantum realm. He did.
Yeah.
Regardless, his powers were limited there.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
and he
Yep.
wasn't in his little chair that actually gave him more of that power. That
Yep.
is his chair, the ones that would give him a lot of his power. So I get it. And again, I was just like, this is so awesome because it's so different from a lot of the things like ants out of everything. But it was cool. It was fun. I didn't
I
mind
had a
it at
good
all.
time.
Yeah. Did you think were there any standout performances for you?
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan Major stole the show. I mean, he just was incredible. He really elevated this movie
Hmm.
by quite a bit. So again, I'm just so excited to see more of him. And again, I really loved the kind of interlude in the middle of the movie where we learned more about like his relationship with Janet, like they're working together. I just thought that they had like a lot of chemistry on screen. I thought that they were the strongest performers just
Yes.
generally,
Yeah, I
like,
think
in
so
this
too.
movie. They managed to, like, give very grounded performances in a very chaotic film.
Mm-hmm.
So I really liked them a lot. Again, I really enjoyed Cassie. I think despite the fact that I think the writers could have done a little bit of a better job with her, I think the actress did a great job with
Mm-hmm.
what she was given.
Yeah.
And again, I'm very excited to see her,
Mhm.
and just generally like really every time like a new young person is like introduced, I'm like, ooh, the young Avengers are coming, I'm so excited.
That's true.
So
That
can't
is so
wait.
true.
Yeah, and I can't wait till some of the young people start actually meeting each other.
Yes.
But yeah, I thought that those were probably the standout
Mm-hmm.
performances. I think that Paul Rudd is always consistent. Like I like Paul Rudd. I think he gave a consistent performance like he
Mm-hmm.
always does.
Yes.
I think that like really Jonathan Majors and Michelle Pfeiffer
Mm-hmm.
were really the standouts. Jonathan Majors especially, but like
Yeah.
those two were the
Yeah.
standouts.
It's gonna be the same for me because especially with how the movie was just, very, we keep saying ridiculous and silly and and just out of this world. The Janet and Kang were like the more serious tone of the movie. It just kind of grounded
Yep.
it more, with how they were performing, how they were interacting with each other, their stories, and just Kang. Obviously, he wasn't being goofy or funny or quirky or whatever. He was just serious about
Mhm.
his thing. He knew what he wanted. That's all he was thinking about. He didn't have time
Yep.
to mess around, you know?
Yep.
And I
Yep.
enjoyed that performance from him to kind of ground the movie a little bit from all the other craziness that was going on. And then him together with Janet, that was just a great performance. Like their interaction was so freaking awesome. I definitely enjoyed it.
It was so yeah, it was so good. And
Mhm.
I feel like I have already said this, but Michael Douglas comedy perfection. Like
Yes.
I just thought that he was so great as Hank Pym. He
Mhm.
knew he like really knew the assignments in this movie.
Oh
I
yeah,
don't
he
know how
definitely
to
did.
like yeah.
Yes.
He just you could tell he was having such a good time with
Mhm.
like what he was being given.
Yes.
And I think that while I really enjoyed Paul Rudd, I think sometimes I think he was falling under the weight of like needing to be so many different things to so many different characters.
Yeah.
And like Michael Douglas was just there for comic relief, and he was just like just home runs every
Yep.
time.
I know. Absolutely. Absolutely. One thing that I wanted to bring up was like, 'cause I think we spoke about it on Twitter, how we could see some similarities with Star Wars.
Oh my god.
There was like so many. I was like, when the first thing that was when they got to the cantina, to like the bar,
Yep.
I was like, oh, this is just like the cantina with all these
This
different
is
aliens and weird looking, characters and stuff.
literally, I mean, the two the cantina, absolutely. I was like, by the time we got there, I was just full on like laughing at how like
Yeah.
wild it was. But even before that, when we are introduced to the I don't even know what those creatures were called, but like they were basically Tuscans. They looked exactly like Tuscan
Oh my God. Yes,
Raiders.
they did. You're absolutely correct. They did.
I was screaming. I kept I was with a friend of mine who's like not a Star Wars person
Hmm.
at all. And like I kept like whispering to them, "They're Tuscans!" And she was like, I don't know what you're saying. I couldn't get over it. And then there were even like little like robed creatures that had glowy
Glowy
eyes
eyes,
that
like
like, and
like
I was just they're
Jawas.
Jawas.
Yes. Oh my God. I mean, and even going bigger, like we had Kang coming and taking over all these different worlds in the quantum realm, like Emperor Palpatine did, and imposed
Yep.
his will on everybody
Yes.
else.
Yep.
I was like,
Yeah.
dude. No, and and then the last thing that I remember was when everybody came together at the end. I was like, this is
Mhm.
the rise of Skywalker. There are more of us.
Yep.
When everybody just
Yeah.
came out of nowhere, all the ships.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, I think the director is named Peyton
Hmm.
Reed. Peyton Reed must be a Star Wars fan.
Yeah.
That is the only explanation for this because
I'm
like
so serious right now. It's seriously. I was like, oh my God,
like
Star Wars.
I
I was with
really
my
think
boyfriend. I was like, you see, he's like, yo, that's Star Wars. Like, so there's a canteen. I'm like, you're right. I'm like, we were like going back and forth too, you know?
oh yeah, for sure. I was basically like I know I think about Star Wars a lot of the time, but like this is not just me.
No, definitely, definitely. You know, there
Yeah.
were the undertones there. So that was really cool.
So
S-
good. I loved it.
so, now with this new phase starting, do you think did this movie or anything that happened in the movie and stuff, is this getting you more like excited for what's to come now with the MCU with these new faces?
Yeah, I think kind of similar to what I was saying earlier. I'm really excited because I really enjoyed Phase 4. Again, I think like people have been weird about Phase
Mhm.
4.
Mhm.
That's a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
But but what I will say is it was really nice to have this tonal shift, and
Mhm.
it's made me like really excited for like the fun energy that we're going to like hopefully see in this
Yeah.
like new phase. I know I've brought up the Marvels quite a few times. That's not the next movie coming up, but it's
Mhm.
the one that I am the most
Yes.
excited
I know that
about.
looks amazing for sure.
Yeah, it looks so amazing, and like I loved Ms. Marvel the show so much, and I just want more of that sort of fun energy.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what I'm looking for, because it's sort of like we got Infinity War, we got Endgame, and then we just got like a bunch of projects that
Mhm.
again were wonderful, great, beautiful writing, such a diversity of
Mhm.
storytelling, but like it was just so rooted in like grief and
Yeah.
trauma
Yeah.
that I am very excited for just kind of going back to like the basics of just
Mhm.
like having like fun
Yeah.
adventures
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
So
For sure.
I love that kind of reset in the tone. It made
Yeah.
me really excited for what's to come.
That's good. I definitely agree with you that I'm excited for what's to come in the MCU. And yes, a little bit more fun, like you said, because like you said that we were gonna get the Young Avengers, and I'm sure that's gonna be very fun and and
Mhm.
and and quick and fast, and it's not gonna be all super serious because they're teenagers, they're kids. So of
Yeah.
course they're gonna be having fun while they go and save the world or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be a nice change, but we're definitely gonna get more serious. So we still have the characters from the Eternals that are gonna be around, and
Yep.
they're more serious about the things. Hopefully when we get Blade, that's also gonna be a little bit more darker tone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
so that's gonna be fun for sure.
A good
Any
balance.
any final thoughts?
I think the only other, thing I would say is just I invite you to really, if you're a person that went and saw this movie and were just like, I didn't really care for it, that's okay. That is totally fine. And I think you're allowed to like or not like whatever projects you want. I just think that let's be open to different kinds of storytelling, because that's what is so great about the MCU, that we have such a diversity of the different kinds of stories and the different ways
Mm-hmm.
we tell stories, and it's not always going to be like the same tone and the same sort of thing every time. That would get really boring like
Mm-hmm.
after a while.
Yes.
So yeah, I just want people to invite people to be open to that. And
There's
that's it.
there's stories for
Yeah,
everybody. If you didn't like one, then you have
exactly.
the other one, and that's for
Exactly.
any nerdum, including Star Wars,
Exactly.
because we have a lot of
In
problems with
very much.
that.
So,
I want to thank you for being a guest on the podcast today. Thank you so much for coming on,
okay.
Natasha. I really appreciate it. Do you want
Thank
to
you
let the
so much.
people know where they can find you on the social media again?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on Twitter personally, and also TikTok under at NKNAPPER. So again, it's at NKNAPPER. And then you can also find me on my podcast on Twitter. Again, it's Pop Chatter Podcast. But you can find me at Pop Chatter Pod. So POPCHATTER POD. We've been on a little bit of a hiatus because like me and my co-host Lindsay have just been like ships in the night and like sick at different various times, but like we're both healthy again, so we're gonna get back to like recording stuff later this week. But yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. And then you guys can find me on Twitter and on TikTok as Star Wars Tia, and also on Instagram as Kari Skywalker. So this is going to wrap up this episode of the Temple of Geek podcast. We want to thank everyone who tuned in today, and especially our guests for being with us today. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to hit us up on Facebook or Twitter by using the handle Temple of Geek. Do you want to check out some of our other episodes or shows? Why don't you head over to templeofgeek.com, where you will find all sorts of content that pertains to the world of geek.
Please follow us on Twitter at Temple of Geek. Follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Temple of Geek. And remember to visit templeofgeek.com, your one stop for all things geek.
Goodbye.
This will conclude our transmission.